still got the online people. All right. As a reminder, final paper is due in 2 weeks. So 21st is 2 weeks from now, which also means we have like 2 weeks of class left. Also, our final exam is 3 weeks from today. It's the last day of exams. Is the 28th of March of April. In here at 8:30. Obviously, for you online students, you don't need to worry about that. Or the online portion of this. You can take it just like every other. Unless you want to come in and take it physically, in which case email me so I can get extras printed out. But I'll just put your section online like I always do, which I'll start that, I guess, on the 21st, so you'll have a week to do it like usual. Just make sure you get it done, because I have to have the grades in by that Tuesday, that next Tuesday. So the 29th, I guess, would be that next day. So, yeah, the 29th, I have to have the grades in. So, you guys here that are going to take it in person, y'all will be fine. But any students that are going to take it online, make sure you get it done by the 28th. Otherwise, you're out of luck, is all I'm going to say. So, because I got to get the grades in by that Tuesday so they can be put into the system. And then that's it. We're done. Nothing else I can do. I don't care. You send me emails that you weren't able to get it done. Nothing I can do about it. So if your computer explodes and you can't get it done, come in here and take it physically. I'll print you out a copy and you can take it with a pencil. It'll be fine. So yeah, it's not any different than any other test we've had. Actually, the only difference is going to be that it's going to be 2 chapters as opposed to 3, which was going to be the original idea anyway. So yeah, which is still going to be 50 questions. These 2 chapters are kind of dense. So yeah, especially this one. So it should be still plenty of information. Won't get too nitpicky. Not next Monday, the 2 weeks from today, when the final paper is due, it will also be a review day, just like normal. So we'll go over basically the final exam. So again, nothing is really going to change in that regard. That's all I got. Any questions from you guys? All set? Okay. All right. So, we ended with, the war pretty much getting ready to start. Well, really, with the war starting and all the players getting on board, Germany telling Belgium to remain neutral while they march through Belgium, which isn't really something that you can do. They call on Britain to honor the Treaty of London, which is to say, if any of the members who signed the Treaty of London were to break Belgian neutrality, then the other members would need to come in and protect Belgium. Because Belgium was like this, essentially, buffer zone between Germany and France. And technically, Prussia signed the Treaty of London here. And as we've said, Prussia is like the heart of the unified Germany, so essentially Prussia signed for what will become Germany, and since Germany violated Belgian neutrality, Britain had to step in for Belgium's sake. And while the book doesn't really go into details about this, I have done quite a bit of study in regards to World War I and the political landscape therein. And technically, Britain didn't fully join the Entente. They did sort of like what America did later, in that they joined as an associated power, where they're like, we're fighting Germany, but we're not really joining you, because they couldn't stomach joining France. A lot of people in Britain wanted to join Germany because there's a lot of like German ancestry in England. In fact, as I mentioned to you guys before, the British royal line is actually German, going back to like right after the Restoration. So they've actually got stronger ties to Germany than to France. And again, there's this whole like anti-France sentiment. It's been a thing in England since 1066. But anyway, long story short, England, France, and Russia versus essentially Germany. Austria is there too. Also, the Ottoman Empire, which wasn't much. Italy also joined the Entente, but Italy was on the side of the Central Powers, but they switched. And then the U.S. eventually joined in right towards the end of the war. But we'll get to that later. All right. This war was on a scale that we'd never seen before. We sent millions of men to the front to fight, and millions of civilians needed to step in to take manufacturing jobs to support them. And there was this belief that the war would be over by Christmas. And I mean, it started in, August? Let's see. Yeah, yeah, October 31st, 1914. Yeah, so there was this belief that July 28th, Austria declared war on Serbia and began bombing Belgrade. So July 28th is when it officially started, at least as far as Austria. August 4th was when Britain officially declared war on the Central Powers, which is when we really got involved. Or when I say we, I mean Britain gets involved. So the war was essentially, this is going to be good old-fashioned European dust-up. We're going to go in, we're going to fight as some Germans, and we'll be back home by Christmas. Not so much. Now, while there was this real belief that the socialists would sit out in what they believed was a capitalist proxy war, nationalism proved stronger. Socialists in Germany chose to fight and help fund the war, as they felt more strongly loyal to Germany than they did as workers. There's a whole thing behind that, and I mean, while we certainly have 2 weeks now to go through this, we don't really have time to go into the minutia of the idea of like capitalist proxy wars. So we'll get into that. St. Petersburg was even named Petrograd, as Berg sounded too German. That was actually a thing that Peter the Great did um, due to his like more westernizing ideals. Um, this was also like we did a lot of weird like anti-German stuff during this time. We renamed sauerkraut like freedom lettuce, I think, which was dumb. Um, what do we call hamburgers? Like called Frankfurt something else too. Frankfurters something else. Like the same like with we refuse. We try to do the same thing with French fries during the invasion of Iraq because France refused to join the coalition of invading a country for what we thought was weapons of mass destruction, but turns out we lied. Yeah, that was the whole thing. Anyway, um, here's the main lines of the war for pretty much the whole 4 years. Um, it didn't move a whole lot. Germany pushed past Belgium, pushed into France. France managed to stop them uh, at this line here, and for the most part, it was a stalemate. This whole for 4 years. There was a little bit of back and forth here and there, but there was never any like World War II level movement of like rapid territorial expansion. So despite everything we talked about last time with these various conventions put into place to keep civilians relatively safe, um, they were still caught up in the war, um, mostly due to more or less famine because of the blockading that the Entente did to the Central Powers, which we'll get into a bit more a little bit later. Um, because, well, Britain controls the ocean, and you need to ship stuff in via the ocean. And, well, you can't do that when Britain has the Navy. Also, we were using machine guns and heavy artillery in Europe for the first time. They've been used in small scale on colonial holdings to, murder natives, but never on what I would only call industrial scale like here. And this was incredibly efficient at killing lots and lots of soldiers. Machine guns just in general, back just in the Franco-Prussian War, you had rifles, and you still sort of had the line of guys fighting the other line of guys, and you would shoot and then reload and then shoot and reload, and it was, pretty simple. But now you had one guy with the machine gun. Well, usually it'd be a crew of maybe three. One guy with the machine gun, one guy feeding the ammo, and another guy ensuring that the machine gun doesn't overheat. But still, you'd have one weapon that could mow down like an entire line of guys in a matter of seconds. That was insane. And then, of course, the artillery, which was not a cannonball anymore, but these massive explosive shells that you could hit people from miles away with, that not only were, well, these big shells, but they were huge explosions that could take out like a city block. So civilians were either deported or simply killed on both sides. And there was also quite a lot of fighting in the colonies, which we'll get into in a little bit. Also, um, we have fun war crimes happening in World War One. Chlorine gas, it was first used at the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915, first used by the Germans, but then the French immediately were like, well, if you guys are going to use it, we're going to use it too. Again, though, like a lot of the propaganda of the time was, oh, only the Germans are using this horrible toxic gas. How dare they? But the French were using it too. In unrestricted submarine warfare, which is to say the German subs would sink anything that they saw, which initially sounds kind of aggressive. But the reason behind that was a lot of times the French and the British would use civilian cruise liners to smuggle military equipment. And they did that a lot. The most famous one that we're familiar with is the Lusitania. It's like, oh, how dare the Germans sink a cruise liner, a civilian-like transport ship. Well, the hold of the ship was full of like arms and ammunition that the British were using, that they were just like shipping on top, like underneath a bunch of civilians. So yeah, the German U-boat like killed a bunch of civilians, but also the British were using those civilians as human shields. So yeah. So here is one of the artillery pieces, quite large, much bigger than the, Napoleon era cannons from barely 100 years before. It's amazing the progress of technology we're seeing between the 1800s and 1900s. And then, from then even to today, the speed at which technology shifts. All right, so the theaters of war. The Western Front is typically the one we talk about the most because that's where the English and the French did a lot of the fighting, and also where America did most of the fighting. The plan was to rush forward and capture France as quickly as possible so that Germany could go back and concentrate on fighting Russia, because Russia was the big threat. This was called the Schlieffen Plan. The idea was to knock France out as quickly as possible, so again they could concentrate on the Eastern Front. Because, well, it hadn't been that long since the Franco-Prussian War, and they knocked out France real quick then. So the idea was, well, let's just do that again, so that we can put all our effort into fighting Russia, because Russia is going to be a pain. However, last time they didn't have to deal with marching through Belgium. And, well, this time it would require marching through Belgium. And this would mean it would risk Britain entering the war, and they really didn't want to have to piss off Britain. Ooh. But in order to maintain the momentum that they needed, they had to go through Belgium, which again caused Britain to enter the war. Also, the issue was it had to be completely on the offensive. This was basically attempting a blitzkrieg before they had the armored mobility that they had during World War II. So they're basically, again, marching largely by foot. They did have a really early version of a Jeep back then, but that was about it. There weren't tanks. There certainly weren't planes, not really, not until kind of late in the war, and even then they weren't really bombers. when back then, the technology really favored the defenders. Once again, machine guns, the Maxim machine gun, when you could just like set up in a machine gun nest, put up some sandbags, pile up some dirt to protect yourself, and nobody can get near you. They're going to be coming from that direction, and you shoot in that direction, and there's nothing they can do about it. If they want to go around, well, you've got guys on the sides protecting your flanks. You dig a ditch in front of you as far as you can go in either direction. They can only come from in front of you. There's nothing they can do. And thus the stalemate. So yeah, they end up stuck in these trenches. That forward momentum didn't last real long. Now, they did make it pretty far into France. It ground to a halt 30 miles outside of Paris at the Battle of the Marne between September 6th to September 14th, 1914. And this is when trench warfare began. The French dug in, set up a real good defensive line, and the Germans had to set up their own defensive line in return. They then attempted to flank one another and essentially dug a trench all the way to the North Sea. So while Germany and France were busy beating each other to death in the trenches, Russia was able to gradually mobilize on the Eastern Front. Trench warfare is not a very efficient form of warfare. It's, again, good for defensive, but you can't fight a two-sided defensive war. Like you can't have both sides fighting defensively. It doesn't work. So in order to try to take the offensive, you would send your guys over the top, over from your trench, across no man's land, to take the enemy trench. So you go from your trench, over the barbed wire, across this desolate stretch of no man's land, which has usually been bombed to hell by artillery, through the enemy machine gun fire, through their barbed wire, down into their trenches, and then you have to fight them in pretty much close range, like bayonet combat, to take their trench. Typically, you wouldn't make it past the no man's land part because they're already shooting at you with machine gun fire. The most famous being the Battle of the Somme in 1916. I will describe to you the Battle of the Somme. I might grab a clip at the end of class for that because there's a real good Battle of the Somme. I'll just describe it to you. They got it on camera. So there was this major offensive that the British had planned for the Battle of the Somme, where basically they were going to ship in a ton of munitions, just a whole bunch of artillery. And what they were going to do was shell this one particular stretch of German trench line for a week straight. 24 hours a day for a week. Just blast it. All day long, all night long, for 7 days straight. And while that was happening, because obviously the Germans can't do anything while they're being shelled, they would have a group of demolition experts dig underneath no man's land and set up this huge landmine underneath the German trench. It's like, I want to say it was like 400 pounds of TNT. So when the bombing, or when the artillery fire stopped, they would then set off that landmine, blow up a huge hole in the middle of the trench, and then once that's all over, surely all the Germans would be dead, and then they would go up over the top, stroll across no man's land, and take the German trench. So they start shipping in the stuff. They've got it all. They brought all the movie cameras, and they start taking video of it. They're making a documentary, and they start shelling the enemy lines. They do it for a week. They blow up the big mine. They're playing music. Well, when they ship it back, they're filming the soldiers going over the top, going over the barbed wire. They start running across no man's land. And the Germans had dug in deeper than they realized. They had bunkers. And the Germans, who had been shelled for a week, and then the big explosion went off, and then suddenly everything's quiet, they're like, well, the British are probably up to something. Let's go back up top and set our machine guns back up. So as the British are running across no man's land, the British set the machine guns back, or the Germans set the machine guns back up and start shooting. And the British get it all on video. And they're still like, oh, this is a heroic moment. And they sent it back to London to show in theaters of how heroic their boys were. And the people riot. People are passing out in the theaters. People are throwing up. People are, well, again, just like literally rioting. And this was the moment that the British and then later Americans realized, hey, we need to start like censoring our war footage and only making sure that the stuff that the people see is positive. So yeah, the Battle of the Somme was not only a major offensive that lasted 4 months total, gained the Allies 8 miles, and cost 600,000 lives. It also was a major PR disaster that changed how war coverage was done from that point on. So yeah, the Battle of the Somme was a pretty big deal. This is the going over the top moment where they're going over the hill. Also, something that needs to be mentioned. I said how my professor mentioned that the 19th century didn't really end until World War I, and this is part of the reason why. So, we talked about how you've got the 3 estates, and nobles are given higher office, etc. So, when the war started, all of the officers in the army are nobility. You're just made an officer as nobility. I mean, that's literally how Napoleon became an officer. He just happened to be really good at what he did. And by tradition, the officer leads the charge. So, this guy up here, this first one over, the first one peeking his head into the machine gun fire, is a nobleman. So unlike today, where like enlisted officers are back at base, or hell, back here in America, giving orders to the poor schmucks actually out on the field, back then the officers were literally leading from the front, and the first ones to catch the bullet. So World War I did more to rid us of nobility than anything else. So, sometimes there's positives in wars. Meanwhile, over on the Eastern Front, it wasn't so much trench warfare. Things weren't as stagnant, but it was still very, very brutal. Excuse me. The Russians did like they did with Napoleon and used scorched earth tactics. So whenever they would retreat, they would just burn everything down. Also, the Germans treated the Eastern Front like territorial expansion, or Lebensraum, which essentially means living space. This made things even worse for the civilians, because with the scorched earth tactics, that means all your farms are being burned down. For Lebensraum, that means your land is being seen as belonging to the German invaders, and you're either kicked out of your homes or killed. There were early German victories at Tannenberg and Masurian Lakes, which made the commanders Paul von Hindenburg and Erich von Ludendorff as heroes, which is why the Zeppelin is called the Hindenburg, because he was this great hero. He also becomes the president of the Weimar Republic, if I remember right. However, by February of 1918, Russia fell to the Bolshevik Revolution, or the Communist Revolution, same thing. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed, allowing the Germans to push back west, and Russia lost much of its hard-won territory. We'll get more into, I think we get into the Russian Revolution a bit more detail a little bit later. We're just looking at the fronts. Yeah, we'll talk about the Bolshevik Revolution in more detail in a moment. Or, not today, but later. This is just the fronts, kind of briefly. So there is the Eastern Front, beginning of the German drive there in red, and then the close of 1915. So they had made quite a bit of gains throughout the war. And then, of course, you have the actual international boundaries we see later. Poland, of course, is just caught in the middle. Poland never is in a good place. Which, again, I hate to repeat myself, but if we decide to go soft with Ukraine, Poland's next. Just saying. Also, the area where everything started was particularly bad. Down in Serbia, Bulgarian and German troops had to come in and help the Austrians by late 1915. Also, the Ottoman Empire attacked Russia, but failed to make any headway. So the Russian troops came back the Ottoman troops came back and needed to. Let's see. Let me see. Here we go. Initially, Ottoman armies succeeded in pushing into multi-ethnic region of the Russian-held Caucasus Mountains, raising hopes among pan-Turkish radicals of a vast territory rich in minerals might be reconquered for the Muslim Empire. But in late December 1914, the Ottomans made a terrible mistake, advancing far into snowbound mountains without supplies. Once again, man, don't go into Russia during the winter. Russians took advantage of the extreme cold, reaching negative 33 degrees Fahrenheit, and pushed back the invading forces at Sarkamish. As they retook territory, they discovered 30,000 frozen Turkish bodies around Sarkamish alone, and captured almost as many prisoners. Of the 90,000 Turkish troops sent into Russia in December, only 12,000 returned. Turkish propaganda urging Muslim subjects of the Tsar to join in the fight against him was largely unsuccessful. Most people prefer to wait and see how things came out. Yada, yada, yada. For centuries, Armenian minority population paid extra taxes to the Ottomans, been banned from certain positions. So the Ottoman army retreated in the spring of 1915. Rumors circulated Armenians were siding with the Russians and seeking to sabotage the Turkish war effort. So they just rolled in and did a genocide against the Armenians. Just because. And more than 100,000 Armenian refugees straggled into Syria and Lebanon, creating enormous new needs for orphanages and social services. At least 800,000 and probably more than 1 million Armenian civilians perished in this cruel campaign. And a lot of countries still won't talk about it because Turkey is still largely being ruled by a autocratic despot, and they don't like talking about their past atrocities. And if you talk about their past atrocities, they don't want to do diplomacy with you. So, like, really, even to this day, the American government hasn't officially recognized the Armenian genocide, even though it 100% happened. Like, this was actually something that Hitler mentioned. He's like, hey, who even talks about the Armenian genocide? While he was, planning his own little genocide. So, yep. The Ottomans were more successful in their defensive tactics. They managed to keep the Allies, which were largely Austrians and New Zealanders, from taking the Dardanelles Straits to resupply Russia. However, the Ottoman Empire did eventually fall apart. Arabian armies siding with the British, which is, say, Lawrence of Arabia against the Turks. So the Ottoman Empire, while it was a part of the Central Powers, didn't get a whole lot done. Besides, genociding a civilian population within their territory. They certainly got that done. And also, there was the whole the Dardanelles thing. The Australians and New Zealanders dealt with, which I've actually got an image of that. So there's the Balkans, which is just utter chaos and ethnic cleansing. Here we go. Gallipoli, that's it. Because there's that old song, The Shores of Gallipoli. Yeah, there was some really poor planning in this particular military campaign. Got a lot of Australians and New Zealanders killed. And at one point while they were taking the beach, the commanders had them stop because it was tea time. And yeah, because the commanders were British. It was a mess, is all I'm going to say. So yeah, being a world war, there was also war in the colonies. Largely in Africa, civilian populations were displaced. The colonial people were able to see these civilized Europeans tear each other apart. So yeah, when we saw the scramble for Africa and where all the different countries had outposts set up, so now these various outposts were fighting each other all across Africa. One of the again, this just sort of goes with my own special interest, but I was doing a lot of research on Zeppelins for my big grad school paper, and one of the biggest things that they did during the war, like what we're familiar with the Zeppelins doing during the First World War, was like bombing London, but mostly they carried supplies. And in particular, this one captain that I was reading his diary, he was carrying supplies like across Africa. And the most interesting thing about that was at night, while going across the Sahara, because of how deserts work, it would get so cold, and being a helium airship, it would get so cold that the ship would sink, and they would be so low to the ground that the bottom of the passenger compartment would scrape across the top of the sand dunes. And then during the day, because it got so hot, the helium in the gas container would expand, and the ship would rise so high in the air that the air would get so cold they would have to go on the outside of the Zeppelin and like break ice off of it so that the whole thing wouldn't just fail. So it was really harrowing, even just without getting shot at, which was a whole separate section when they were bombing Russia and then eventually London. So yeah, there was a lot going on in Africa during World War I as well. Also over in Asia, Japan largely benefited. They allied with Britain to watch over Britain's colonies in the face of potential German aggression. And they were also told by Britain, hey, Germany's got some territory over in the Pacific. If you want, you can grab those. And Japan's like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. So they just started grabbing German islands. And also signed a secret treaty with China to take lands in Manchuria, because why not? So yeah, Japan was actually on, I guess you'd say, our side in World War I. They didn't do a lot of fighting, but they were mostly just making sure that Britain didn't have to worry about their stuff in the Pacific. And if they're on Britain's side, they were technically on our side in World War I. So there again is Africa post, the scramble for Africa. So you've got the British here, and then big old German East Africa there. You got a couple of other German regions here, and then you've got the British. The purple should be French, yeah. Portugal wasn't really involved in the war, I don't think. Well, Belgium, the Belgian Congo. I guess they were fighting. So yeah, Germany had to move stuff around quite a bit. All right. Let's get into the technology of the war. So war tends to lead to innovation, and if we had time to get into World War II, we'd actually see where a lot of this innovation evolves greatly, which, like I said, I am going to try to briefly go over the interwar era and World War II just to show you guys before we finish the semester. Advanced guns, poison gas like chlorine, and then eventually mustard gas. Artillery was commonly used. We eventually had tanks and planes towards the end of the war, which didn't do a whole lot. The tanks back then, I've got pictures, I'll show you guys in a minute, but the tanks back then were not real effective. They were mostly used for going through barbed wire. But they didn't have when you think of a tank, you think of the treads and the cannon on top. It didn't have the cannon on top. It mostly just had the treads. The armor also was real bad. If you shot it from the right angle, you could get through it with really any decent caliber rifle. And then the bullet would bounce around inside the compartment and kill pretty much everybody inside. Also, you didn't even have to do that. A lot of times the diesel engine inside the thing would just suffocate the guys in it. Um, yeah, the tanks were real bad back then. Um, as far as planes, and then also Zeppelins, were mostly used for reconnaissance. Um, although after a little while, some idiot decided to bring up a revolver and start shooting at the other guy in the plane, and then they started figuring out how to like mount machine guns on their planes, and then how to mount them on the front of the plane without shooting off the propeller, and then you gradually had like plane fighting. Um, and then they figured out how to make a plane strong enough to actually carry like explosives and drop bombs on like enemy trenches. So by the end of the war, we had the start of what we'd see by World War II of like proper planes and proper tanks. Um, as far as navies, uh, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't like, again, World War II, we have big naval battles. There's a lot going on in the Pacific. Um, there is the Battle of Jutland. There is one big naval battle between Germany and England. And it's a tie. It's a draw. England, as like the king of the ocean, goes up against Germany as this up and coming new power that's just made their navy, and they fight to a draw, which for Germany was basically a win, because they're like, hey, we managed to not die. This is great. And for Britain was essentially a loss, because how could they not beat this new up-and-coming nation at the thing that they've been winning since essentially the Spanish Armada? Obviously U-boats played a big role with breaking past the blockades, and the use of the radio would shape, obviously, things to come going forward. A big part of the Battle of Jutland was the use of the radio, because the German side had a number of Zeppelins as like spotters, and one of them had a radio on board, and they saw over the horizon more British ships coming, and they're like, hey guys, we need to leave. There's more British coming. We will not be able to maintain this draw if we get outnumbered. So they were able to retreat and not get sunk, thanks to using the radio. Which again, you like a radio as like music and entertainment was a thing, but using it as like a two-way communication device hadn't quite made it as technology yet. So that's really cool. I mean, again, today that just seems like primitive technology, but it's really neat to see that evolving. So there again, you have artillery. This is the more fast-firing artillery rather than the real big one I showed you guys earlier. There's a tank. Look at it. It's adorable. Yeah, especially just for like running over like the big strands of like razor wire. This one's actually a bit more angled than the ones I've seen before, where they're just like, it's like they took some. It looks like the Killdozer, where they just took a tractor and put some armor plating on it and hope for the best. This is at least angled a little bit, so if you shoot at it, hopefully your bullet will bounce in a way that won't go through the armor, because that's not very thick armor. It also has, it looks like it's got a little bit of a turret here. The one I remember seeing, it just had sort of a slit that you would stick your gun out of and shoot and hope for the best. Yes, this is a little bit better than the really early OG prototype. And this is later. This is again not quite World War II like Patton tank, but this is a lot better than the one we just had. Even though it's smaller, um, is more effective at doing what it needs to do. There's your little planes, little actually these aren't bombers, but they're flying in a formation, so they're clearly not just reconnaissance. These are little fighter planes. And there's the battleships actually doing the battleship thing rather than a one that's just sitting in harbor today, 100 years later. Um, yeah, when these things were all firing in one direction, the whole ship would just rock off to one side. Crazy stuff. Crazy power these things had. All right, let's do one more thing. The old technology. So while we had radios and I guess we had telephones, but not really. Yeah, when telephones existed, but on the front lines, you didn't really have that efficiency. Telegraph was still important. Obviously, the interception of the Zimmerman telegraph that urged Mexico to join the Central Powers was a major part of getting America to join the Entente. Now, that wasn't the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, of getting America to join, but it's seen as one of the final pushes. It's complicated. Horses, which is weird to say as a technology, but as far as mankind using animals for labor, horses are very, very old. When it comes to human interaction. They're still very important in the Great War, moving supplies, munitions, wounded troops. We did, again, still have some level of motor vehicles, but you've seen what some of these areas look like. It was just, I wouldn't even describe it as mud. It was just mire. You couldn't even get a modern all-terrain vehicle out there. Horses would be necessary for that. And they also died in exceedingly high numbers because they were out on the battlefield. They were out there in the danger zone. Here we go. Hold on. Horses and mules were the major means of conveyance for soldiers and civilian refugees alike, especially so in the eastern and southeastern fronts where railroad coverage was less dense. But even in the west, horses were indispensable. The only places that were not in heavy use were in the deserts, where camels were more practical, and in Africa, where they were particularly susceptible to the tsetse fly. Every nation had its cavalry, and that still meant horses. As tanks had come into use only late in the war, horses and mules were used to pull wagons, to drag artillery, and to convey the wounded to hospitals. They picked their way across Alpine and Albanian narrow mountain passages, slogged through the rutted, mud-holed roads of Eastern Europe. Horses were called up in August 1914, 600,000 for the Austrians, 750,000 for the Germans, more than 1 million for the Russians. By mid-1916, the British had nearly 591,000 horses, 213,000 mules, 47,000 camels, 11,000 oxen in service. Like humans, animals starved, froze, thirsted, and died in staggering but unrecorded numbers. Millions surely were killed in the course of battles and retreats, many too on the Hungary home front. There are accounts of horses being attacked on the boulevards of Russia's Petrograd in 1916, starving inhabitants, butchering and eating the animals on the spot. For Europe's horses, too, the war brought with it new forms of suffering and death on an unprecedented scale. I have seen memorials to service animals, but to horses specifically for World War I. Because of the just sheer scale at which they provided assistance and what's the word? Just like necessary work during the war. So here I use this in my American history class for like the Zimmerman note, which as I also mentioned in my American history class isn't completely accurate. So you've got here like for Mexico they would have gotten, according to the Zimmerman note, if Mexico joined the Central Powers and Central Powers won, they would get Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Germany would presumably get the rest of America. And then it says over here, for Japan, California, which, no, Japan was working with England, so that's incorrect. But the rest of it is too good to not use. So here we have, there's a lot of good images of World War I horses. I can't say this is my favorite one because there's another one coming up, but this one's really good, where it's a horse pulling a medical wagon being used to treat another horse. That's really good. I really like that. There's something special about that. So that one's really good. What else do I have? This one's also good. It's a gas mask for a horse because, well, the horses are right there at the trenches, and the trenches are being attacked by a gas attack. Well, you don't want your horse to suffer, so give them a gas mask. Apparently, I just recently read. Now there were some people have asked me before. It's like, well, what about like their eyes? Well, apparently there were some gas masks that would cover their whole face. A lot of horses like their face being covered. So some horses, when you put the gas mask on them, they wouldn't want you to take them off. Which seems weird, because you think like things covering an animal's face, they'd freak out. But like horses are neurotic, is the only way I can put it. Horses are weird. And they apparently, when you shut out their senses, they feel more calm. So like when you shut out, make it so that they don't see and hear things as acutely as they normally would. It calms them down, and then when you try to take it off, they don't like that. So yeah, horses are weird. There's a good one. There's a dude with his dogs, because of course there's all sorts of other animals besides just horses. It's a carrier pigeon with a spy camera. They release them over the trenches, and the pigeon will fly around and then come back, and the camera will be set to take pictures every, 30 seconds or something. So maybe it would hopefully get images that they want, and also hopefully the people in the other trench wouldn't notice that, hey, that pigeon's got something strapped to it, we should probably shoot it. There we go. There's my favorite image. A guy writing a letter back home while his horse hangs out beside him. That's a good one. That's my favorite one. I like it. Horses are big babies. Cows more so. Cows are big dumb dogs, in my experience. Again, horses are a little bit neurotic. It's hard to kind of tell what they're thinking. Cows just aren't thinking. They're dumb and, for the most part, pretty sweet. All right. That's it for that section. Next up is the home front, and then it's on into the Russian Revolution. So I think we'll just end there because I don't want to get done too early. So, yeah, we'll continue on with more World War I next time. So I'll see y'all on Wednesday.